The desert wind carries the screams of fallen armies. Across the blackened plains of Bashan, a shadow rises, 13 feet of bone, muscle, and ancient fury. His name is Og, the last of the Rephaim, the final son of the giants who once walked the earth before the flood. In his fortress of black basalt, an iron bed waits, 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide. A throne built for a king who refused to bow to any god but himself. Now, the armies of Israel march toward his gates. Moses, the prophet of fire, carries a promise from heaven. The giant must fall. But Og has never known defeat. He has crushed nations. He has drunk the blood of kings, and he will not go quietly into the dust. What you are about to witness has been buried beneath empires and forgotten by time. If your soul hungers for truth, subscribe now and remain until the end. This is not legend. This is war. Clouds of ancient gold hang suspended over a world still young. Below, the earth stretches vast and untamed. Mountains taller than any that exist today. Forests so dense that sunlight fights to reach the ground. Rivers wide as seas carving paths through valleys that have never known the footprint of man. The air itself hums with a strange energy, as if creation is still breathing its first breath. This is the age before the deluge. The age before the flood erased the memory of what once was. The age when heaven and earth were not yet fully separated, when the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men and made a choice that would shatter the order of creation forever. They came down from the heights of the celestial realm, the Watchers, the Grigori, 200 beings of light who had once stood in the presence of the Almighty. Upon the snow-crowned peak of Mount Hermon, they gathered in secret council. Their leader, Semyaza, stood before them with eyes that flickered between divine radiance and something darker. He knew the cost. He knew the punishment that awaited. And still, he raised his voice above the wind. "We have seen their beauty," Semyaza declared, his words cutting through the frozen air. "The daughters of men walk the earth like flowers waiting to be plucked. And I will not return to the cold silence of eternity. I will not watch from the heights while warmth and flesh exist below. Let the Most High judge us. Let him cast us into the abyss. But tonight we descend. Tonight we choose." One by one, the Watchers swore the oath. They sealed their rebellion with blood and fire. And as the stars trembled above them, they descended from Hermon like falling meteors, their light dimming with each step toward the earth. The unions began in secret. Angels lay with women, celestial seed planted in mortal wombs. But what grew inside those wombs was neither angel nor man. It was something else entirely, something that should never have existed. The Nephilim were born screaming. They emerged from their mothers with bodies too large for human birth, killing many in the very act of entering the world. Within months, they towered over their fathers. Within years, they stood 20, 30, 40 feet tall. Mountains of muscle and bone with the strength of heaven and the appetites of beasts. Their eyes burned with the fire of their angelic fathers, but their hunger was bottomless. They consumed the crops of entire nations in single feasts. They drained rivers to quench their thirst. And when the food was gone, when the fields lay barren and the animals fled, they turned their gaze upon mankind itself. Cannibalism spread like a plague across the ancient world. The giants devoured villages whole. They roasted men on spits like cattle. They ground bones into flour and baked bread from human remains. The screams of the innocent rose day and night to the throne of God, and the earth itself groaned under the weight of its monstrous children. Blood soaked into the soil so deeply that the ground itself seemed to weep. This was not creation. This was corruption, a genetic rebellion against the divine order that threatened to consume everything the Almighty had spoken into existence. Among the bloodlines of the Nephilim, one tribe rose above the rest. They called themselves the Rephaim, a word that meant the dead ones, the shades, spirits that walked between worlds. The Rephaim carried the purest blood of the Watchers. They were stronger, faster, more cunning than their monstrous brothers. While other Nephilim raged and destroyed without thought, the Rephaim built. They forged weapons of iron when mankind still fought with sharpened bone. They constructed cities of black basalt that rose like dark temples against the sky. They established kingdoms that would endure for centuries, but the heavens watched. And in the courts of eternity, a judgment was already written in letters of fire. The flood would come, a baptism of destruction to cleanse the earth of its abominations. The waters would rise above the highest mountains. The Nephilim would drown, their massive bodies sinking into the depths, their spirits cast into chains of darkness. Yet not all would perish. Not all bloodlines would be erased. Somewhere in the chaos of the deluge, a remnant escaped. A seed survived. And centuries later, in the volcanic highlands of Bashan, where the soil was black and the mountains breathed smoke, the last of the Rephaim would rise to claim his throne. His bed would be forged of iron. His name would be carved into the memory of nations. And when the armies of Israel finally marched against him, they would face a king who had never known defeat. His name was Og, and his war was just beginning. The waters receded slowly, revealing a world reborn in silence. Where once great cities had stood, now there was only mud and stone. Where millions had walked, now only corpses lay rotting beneath an unforgiving sun. The flood had done its work. The Nephilim were gone, their massive bodies buried beneath layers of sediment, their bones destined to become the fossils that would confuse scholars for millennia. But in the highlands east of the Jordan, where volcanic rock rose like black teeth from the earth, something stirred in the shadows. Something that should have drowned with the rest. The Rephaim had survived. Not many, perhaps a handful of families, hidden in caves high above the waterline, fed by streams that flowed from underground springs. They had watched the rain fall for 40 days. They had heard the screams of their brothers as the waters swallowed them whole. And they had sworn, in the darkness of their stone refuges, that they would never be so vulnerable again. They would build. They would multiply. They would rise. Generations passed. The Rephaim spread across the land of Bashan like a dark stain, their bloodline growing stronger with each generation. They took wives from the surrounding tribes, Amorites, Canaanites, daughters of men who trembled at the sight of their giant lords, but submitted nonetheless. And then, in a fortress carved from black basalt, a child was born who would surpass them all. "He will not stop growing," the midwife whispered, her voice trembling as she held the infant. He was already the size of a 3-year-old, his eyes open and aware, staring at the world with an intelligence that should not exist in one so young. "This one is different. This one carries the old blood, the pure blood, the blood of the Watchers themselves." They named him Og. In the ancient tongue, it meant long-necked, a prophecy of the height he would reach. By his 5th year, he stood taller than any grown man in Bashan. By his 10th, he could lift boulders that teams of oxen could not move. By his 20th, he had killed his first king in single combat, crushing the man's skull with his bare hands while the enemy army watched in horror. The throne of Bashan was his by right of blood and conquest, and he would hold it for centuries. Og did not age as men aged. The blood of the watchers flowed thick in his veins, granting him a lifespan that stretched beyond the memory of mortals. He watched generations rise and fall. He saw empires bloom and wither. He crushed rebellions before they could begin, and executed rivals before they could dream of challenging him. 60 cities fell under his dominion, fortresses of black stone with walls so thick that no army could breach them, gates of iron so heavy that only giants could move them. Bashan became a kingdom of terror, ruled by a king who had never known defeat. His throne room was carved from the heart of a volcanic mountain, lit by rivers of molten rock that flowed through channels in the floor. There, upon a seat of polished obsidian, Og received the tribute of conquered nations. Gold, silver, slaves, cattle, all flowed into Bashan like water into the sea. But his greatest treasure was not gold, it was iron. The Rephaim had mastered the secret of smelting iron ore centuries before the nations around them, and Og hoarded this knowledge like a dragon hoards flame. His weapons were iron, his armor was iron, and his bed, the bed that would become legend, was forged of iron so pure it gleamed like black water under starlight. 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, 13 feet by 6 feet in the measurements of later ages. The iron bed of Og was not merely furniture, it was a statement, a monument, a declaration that no man, no army, no god would ever make him bow. He slept upon cold metal because he feared nothing. He needed no comfort, no softness, no warmth. He was Og, king of Bashan, last of the Rephaim, heir to the blood of angels. And as he lay upon his iron throne each night, staring at the ceiling of carved stone above him, he believed with absolute certainty that his kingdom would last forever. But far to the south, in the wilderness of Sinai, a nation of slaves had just walked through a parted sea, and their God had made them a promise that included every inch of Og's domain. Black mountains rise against a blood-red sky. The land of Bashan stretches across the horizon like a kingdom carved from the bones of the earth itself. Volcanic plains where nothing soft survives, basalt plateaus that shimmer with heat, and forests of ancient oaks so thick that sunlight dies before it reaches the ground. This is not a land that welcomes the living. This is a land that devours the weak, and at its heart, 60 fortified cities stand like iron fists raised against heaven, each one a monument to the power of the giant who rules them all. The cities of Bashan were not built by men. Their walls rise 40, 50, 60 feet into the air, constructed from blocks of black basalt so massive that no human engineer could explain how they were lifted into place. The gates are iron, forged in furnaces that burn day and night, thick enough to stop battering rams, heavy enough to require teams of giants to move. Inside these walls, the Rephaim walk streets paved with crushed volcanic rock, their footsteps shaking the ground, their shadows falling over ordinary men like the shadow of death itself. "Look upon my cities," Og declared from the balcony of his palace in Ashtaroth. Below him, thousands labored in the forges, the fields, the quarries, human slaves captured from raids across Canaan, their spirits broken, their bodies bent beneath loads no free man would carry. These walls will stand for 10,000 years. These gates will never fall. Let the nations tremble. Let the kings of the earth send their armies. I will hang their corpses from my towers and feed their flesh to my dogs. Ashtaroth and Edrei, twin capitals of darkness, centers of Og's power. Ashtaroth rose from a volcanic plateau, its temples dedicated to gods whose names would later be forbidden, whose rituals demanded blood and fire and the screams of children. The priests of Ashtaroth wore robes dyed crimson with human blood. They read the future in the entrails of sacrifices, and they whispered to Og that his reign was eternal, that the stars themselves had ordained his dominion, that no force in heaven or earth could break the power of the last Rephaim king. Edrei was different. A fortress city built for war, carved into the living rock of a mountain, its tunnels stretching deep into the earth like the roots of some monstrous tree. Here, Og kept his armories, his treasuries, his legions of giant warriors trained from birth to kill without mercy. The soldiers of Edrei wore armor of iron scales, carried spears tipped with iron blades, fought with a discipline that transformed their natural strength into something even more terrifying. They had never been defeated. They had never retreated. The very name Edrei had become a synonym for slaughter in the languages of surrounding nations. But Og's power extended beyond mere military might. He had built something unprecedented, a network of roads connecting his 60 cities, allowing his armies to march from one end of Bashan to the other in days rather than weeks. He had established granaries filled with wheat and barley, ensuring his people would never starve, his armies would never weaken. He had created alliances with the Amorite kings to his south and west, binding them to his cause through marriage, through tribute, through the simple reality that opposing Og meant annihilation. Bashan was not just a kingdom. It was an empire in everything but name. The ordinary people of Canaan spoke of Bashan in whispers, as if saying the name too loudly might summon its king. Merchants who traveled through its territory paid tribute at every gate, praying they would not be seized as slaves. Mothers frightened children into obedience with stories of Og, the giant who ate disobedient boys, the monster who ground little girls' bones for bread. These were exaggerations, perhaps, but not by much. Og had earned his reputation through centuries of calculated brutality, and he cultivated fear the way other kings cultivated wheat. Fear was his currency. Terror was his throne. And yet, for all his power, Og had begun to hear rumors that troubled even his ancient heart. From the south, beyond the wilderness of Sinai, a nation was moving, a people who had been slaves in Egypt, who had somehow broken free, who carried with them an ark of gold and worshipped a God who claimed dominion over all the earth. They had already destroyed the armies of the Amalekites. They had already crushed the kings of the southern desert, and now, as Og sat upon his throne of obsidian, messengers arrived with news that chilled even his giant blood. The Israelites had turned north. They were coming for Canaan, and the God who led them had promised them everything, including Bashan, including his cities, including his throne. Og rose from his seat, his shadow covering the messengers like a shroud. For the first time in centuries, something flickered in his eyes that might have been called fear. Fire descends from the mountain, not the orange flames of wood and oil, but something else entirely. White fire, living fire, fire that burns without consuming, that illuminates without blinding. The peak of Sinai disappears into clouds of smoke and glory, and the ground trembles beneath the feet of 2 million souls who stand at the base, their faces pale with terror, their hearts frozen with the realization that they are witnessing something no human eye was ever meant to see. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has come down to speak. Moses alone ascends. 80 years old, his staff in hand, his sandals removed, he climbs into the consuming fire as if walking into the embrace of a father. Behind him, the people weep. Mothers clutch their children. Warriors who fought their way out of Egypt fall to their knees and beg for mercy. The voice from the mountain is not loud. It does not need to be. It resonates in the bones, in the blood, in the deepest chambers of the soul. Every word strikes like a hammer upon the anvil of the human heart. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. 40 days Moses remains in the presence of the Almighty. 40 nights he receives the words that would shape the destiny of nations. But woven through the commandments, buried within the promises and warnings, is a revelation that will not be fulfilled for another generation. A prophecy of conquest, of possession, of a land flowing with milk and honey that currently belongs to others. God speaks of Canaan. He speaks of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Jebusites. He speaks of the giants who dwell in the land. And he speaks of Og. The Rephaim, the Lord declares, his voice like the roar of many waters. The sons of the fallen ones who defiled my creation. They believe their walls will protect them. They believe their strength makes them invincible. But I have seen their abominations. I have counted their sins, and I have decreed their end. You will drive them out. You will tear down their altars. You will break their pillars and burn their groves. Not one shall remain. Not one shall draw breath in the land I am giving you. Moses descends from the mountain with tablets of stone in his hands and fire still clinging to his face. The people cannot look at him directly. They beg him to veil himself, to hide the glory that has marked him. But the words he carries cannot be hidden. God has promised them a homeland. God has promised them victory. And God has specifically named the giants who must fall before that victory can be complete. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Emim, and above them all, ruling from his iron throne in Bashan, the king whose destruction has been decreed before the foundations of the world, Og. The years that follow are years of testing, of failure, of wandering. At Kadesh Barnea, 10 spies return from Canaan with terror in their eyes. The land devours its inhabitants, they cry. The cities are fortified to heaven. And the giants, we saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. The people weep. They speak of returning to Egypt. They forget the parted sea, the manna from heaven, the pillar of fire that guides them by night. Fear swallows faith, and God's judgment falls swift and absolute. This generation will not enter the promised land. They will wander for 40 years until every adult who doubted has returned to dust. But God does not forget his promise. A new generation rises in the wilderness, children who have known nothing but the presence of the Almighty, who have eaten miracle bread every morning, who have drunk water from split rocks, who have seen the glory cloud settle over the tabernacle night after night. These are warriors forged in the furnace of divine discipline. They do not fear giants. They do not tremble at fortified walls. They have grown up in the shadow of the living God, and they know with absolute certainty that no power on earth can stand against his decree. Moses is now 120 years old, still strong, his eyes still clear. Beside him stands Joshua, the warrior who will lead the conquest, the soldier who alone among the 12 spies had believed that God could deliver on his promises. Together they look eastward, toward the lands beyond the Jordan, toward the black mountains of Bashan, visible on the distant horizon. The time of waiting is over. The years of wandering have ended. And somewhere in the darkness of his volcanic throne room, Og feels a chill pass through his ancient bones. The God of Israel has turned his gaze upon Bashan, and judgment is marching north. Dust rises from the wilderness road as 2 million souls march northward. The column stretches for miles, families with children on their shoulders, cattle and sheep bleating in the heat. Warriors gripping spears of bronze, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the kingdoms of the Amorites await. For 40 years, they have wandered. For 40 years, they have buried their fathers and mothers in the sand. But now the children have become soldiers. The slaves have become conquerors. And the God who parted the sea walks before them in a pillar of cloud that never fades. Moses stands at the head of the column, his staff raised, his voice carrying across the multitude like thunder rolling down from heaven. The Lord your God has given you this land to possess it. You shall not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you. Behind him, 600,000 fighting men grip their weapons tighter. They have heard the stories of the giants. They have heard the tales of fortified cities with walls that touch the sky. But they have also seen the Red Sea split in two. They have seen water pour from solid rock. They have eaten bread that fell from heaven every morning for 4 decades. Their God is not a distant deity carved from stone. Their God is fire and fury and absolute faithfulness to his word. Before them lies the kingdom of Sihon, king of Heshbon, ruler of the Amorites, a warrior whose name is spoken with dread from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Sihon is not a giant, not a Rephaim, but he is no less dangerous. He has conquered lands that once belonged to Moab. He has built a military empire through cunning and cruelty. His chariots are the fastest in the region. His archers are legendary. And when messengers arrive from the Israelite camp requesting peaceful passage through his territory, Sihon responds with the only language he understands: war. "Let me pass through your land," Moses had written. "We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. We will pay for food and water. Only let us pass through on foot." The offer was reasonable. The terms were generous, but Sihon saw only weakness. A nation of former slaves wandering in the wilderness, begging for permission to cross his borders. Surely they could be crushed, their wealth seized, their women taken. He gathered his army at Jahaz and rode out to meet the Israelites with murder in his heart. The Battle of Jahaz lasted less than a day. Sihon's chariots charged across the plain, wheels thundering, archers loosing arrows that darkened the sky. But something strange happened. Horses stumbled for no reason, wheels broke without striking stones, arrows that should have found their marks sailed harmlessly overhead. The Israelite warriors advanced in tight formation, shields locked, spears leveled, and above them the pillar of cloud swirled and darkened as if the very presence of God was descending upon the battlefield. Sihon's army broke, not slowly, not in an organized retreat, but in complete and total collapse. Warriors who had never known fear suddenly fled, screaming. Commanders who had won 100 battles threw down their swords and ran. "Do not fear him," the Lord had told Moses, "for I have given him into your hand, with all his people and his land." The promise was fulfilled before the sun had set. Sihon was killed in the rout, his body trampled beneath the feet of fleeing soldiers. Heshbon fell without a siege. City after city opened its gates, or was conquered in a single assault. The Israelites swept through Sihon's kingdom like fire through dry grass, taking possession of fields and vineyards, houses and storerooms, everything that had belonged to the Amorite king now belonging to the children of Abraham. News of the victory spread across Canaan like wildfire. In the fortified cities west of the Jordan, kings who had laughed at reports of wandering slaves suddenly grew silent. In the palaces of the Philistines, war councils were called, and in the volcanic throne room of Bashan, Og received messengers who spoke in trembling voices of what had happened at Jahaz. Sihon was dead. His kingdom was gone. The Israelites had taken everything. And now they were turning their eyes northward, toward the Black Mountains, where the last of the Rephaim ruled. Og rose from his iron bed, his massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed the entire chamber. Sihon had been an ally. Sihon had been a buffer. Sihon was now a corpse. The giant king walked to the window of his palace and stared south at the distant glow of Israelite campfires. They were coming, and for the first time in 500 years, Og began to prepare for war. The campfires of Israel stretch across the conquered plains of Heshbon like a sea of fallen stars. Smoke rises from 1,000 cooking fires, carrying the smell of roasted meat and unleavened bread into the night air. Warriors sharpen bronze blades on stones, worn smooth by use. Women sing songs of victory, their voices mingling with the laughter of children who have never known slavery, who have grown up free beneath the pillar of cloud. But in the tent at the center of the camp, where the lamplight flickers against walls of goat hair, Moses kneels in silence. His eyes are closed. His lips move without sound. And the presence of the Almighty settles over him like a weight that would crush any ordinary man. "Arise," the Lord speaks, his voice filling the tent like the roar of a distant waterfall. "Turn northward. Go up against Og, the king of Bashan, him and all his people and all his land. Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand, with all his people and his land. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon." Moses opens his eyes. The command is clear. The promise is absolute. But even the prophet of God feels the weight of what lies ahead. Sihon was a man, dangerous, powerful, but still a man. Og is something else entirely. The last of the Rephaim, a giant whose bed is forged of iron, a king who has ruled for centuries, who has crushed every enemy who dared to challenge him, whose very name causes grown warriors to tremble. Tomorrow, the armies of Israel will march into his domain. Tomorrow, they will face the descendant of the Nephilim. Tomorrow, faith will be tested against flesh, and only one will survive. Dawn breaks over the Jordan Valley, painting the eastern mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The trumpets sound, not the soft notes of assembly, but the sharp, piercing blasts of war. 600,000 warriors form into ranks, their tribal banners snapping in the morning wind. Judah takes the lead. As always, their lion standard raised high. Behind them come Reuben, Gad, Simeon, the sons of Joseph, Benjamin, all 12 tribes united in purpose, moving as one body toward the shadow of the Black Mountains. "What awaits us in Bashan?" a young soldier asks his father as they march. He is perhaps 18 years old, born in the wilderness, raised on manna and miracles. He has never seen a giant. He has only heard the stories, tales of monsters who eat human flesh, who crush men like insects, who cannot be killed by ordinary weapons. His father, a veteran who remembers the fear at Kadesh Barnea, who watched his own father die in the wilderness for the sin of unbelief, places a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. "What awaits us," the father replies, "is the faithfulness of our God. I watched the sea split open when I was younger than you. I watched water pour from stone. I watched Sihon's army break like waves against a cliff. Og is tall. Og is strong. But Og is not taller than the one who measures the heavens with the span of his hand. Og is not stronger than the one who hung the stars in their courses. March forward, my son. March forward, and fear nothing." The road to Bashan climbs steadily upward, leaving the fertile valleys behind, entering a landscape of black volcanic rock and twisted oak forests. The air grows cooler. The sky seems darker, even at midday, as if the sun itself hesitates to shine upon the domain of the giants. Scouts return with troubling reports. The cities ahead are fortified beyond anything they encountered in Sihon's kingdom. Walls of basalt rise 60 feet high. Gates of iron bar every entrance. And in the fields outside these cities, they have seen footprints pressed into the hard ground. Footprints 3 feet long, sunk deep into soil that should not hold such marks. Moses calls a halt at the border of Bashan, where a stone marker carved with ancient symbols declares the beginning of Og's domain. Behind him, 2 million souls wait in silence. Before him, the black mountains loom like the gates of the underworld itself. Somewhere beyond those peaks, in his fortress of volcanic stone, Og is gathering his armies. The giant king has never lost a battle. He has never retreated from a fight. And he has sworn, on the iron bed that serves as his throne, that he will crush these desert wanderers and hang their prophet's body from the walls of Edrei. The final battle approaches. The War of Bashan is about to begin. Torchlight flickers against walls of polished obsidian. The throne room of Edrei stretches vast and dark, carved from the living heart of a volcanic mountain, its ceiling lost in shadows that no flame can pierce. Rivers of molten rock flow through channels in the floor, casting an orange glow that dances across the faces of those assembled. Warlords, chieftains, priests of forbidden gods, the greatest warriors of the Rephaim bloodline, all gathered at the summons of their king. And at the center of it all, seated upon a throne of black stone, Og waits in terrible silence. He is a vision from nightmare. 13 feet of muscle and sinew, his skin darkened by centuries of sun and fire, his arms thick as tree trunks, his hands capable of crushing a man's skull like rotten fruit. His eyes burn with intelligence. This is no mindless brute, no simple monster driven by hunger. This is a king who has ruled for 500 years, who has outmaneuvered every rival, who has built an empire through cunning as much as strength. Upon his brow rests a crown of iron, forged in the same fires that made his legendary bed. He wears armor of black scales, each plate hammered by giant smiths who learned their craft from the Watchers themselves. When he speaks, his voice rolls through the chamber like thunder echoing through a canyon. "Tell me again," Og commands, his gaze fixed upon the messenger who kneels before him. "Tell me what happened at Jahaz. Tell me how Sihon, who conquered half of Canaan, fell to a rabble of desert wanderers in a single day." The messenger trembles. He is a man of the Amorites, one of the few survivors of the slaughter, his clothes still stained with the dust of his flight. "My lord, I do not understand it myself. Sihon's army was strong. His chariots were swift. We should have crushed them within an hour. But something walked with them. Something we could not see. Our horses went mad. Our arrows flew wild. our warriors forgot how to fight. It was as if the air itself had turned against us. Silence falls over the chamber. The warlords exchange uneasy glances. The priests mutter prayers to gods whose names must never be spoken in daylight. But Og does not move. His expression does not change. He has lived long enough to recognize what the messenger describes. He has heard the ancient stories, passed down through generations of Rephaim, of a God who walked with a man named Abraham, who destroyed the cities of the plain with fire from heaven, who drowned the world in the days of Noah. This is not an ordinary enemy. This is the God who killed his ancestors. "My king," one of the warlords speaks, stepping forward. He is a giant himself, nearly 10 feet tall, commander of the armies of Ashtaroth. Perhaps we should seek alliance. The kingdoms of Canaan fear this Israelite God as much as we do. Together, united, we could field an army of 200,000. We could overwhelm them with numbers alone. Og rises from his throne. The movement is slow, deliberate, and every eye in the chamber follows him as he descends the steps of black stone. He walks to the warlord who spoke, stopping close enough that his shadow swallows the smaller giant completely. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then his hand moves faster than sight, seizing the warlord by the throat, lifting him off the ground as if he weighs nothing at all. "Alliance?" Og's voice is soft now, almost gentle, which makes it infinitely more terrifying. "You speak to me of alliance? I am Og. I am the last of the pure blood. I have crushed kingdoms while your grandfather was still nursing at his mother's breast. I do not ally with the weak. I do not hide behind the walls of lesser kings. The Israelites come? Let them come. They will break upon my cities like water upon stone. Their God may have drowned my ancestors, but he has never faced me." He releases the warlord, who crashes to the floor, gasping for air. Og turns to address the assembled council, his voice rising to fill every corner of the vast chamber. "Summon every warrior in Bashan. Empty the garrisons of all 60 cities. Strip the farms of every man who can hold a spear. We will meet these Israelites at Edrei, not cowering behind our walls, but on the field of battle. Let their God watch as I tear their prophet limb from limb. Let their God explain to his people why he led them to slaughter. The Rephaim will not fade into history. The Rephaim will not bow to some desert tribe and their invisible deity. We will fight. We will conquer. And when the dust settles, the name of Og will be remembered forever as the giant who broke the armies of Israel." The warlords pound their fists against their chests in salute. The priests raise their staffs and chant blessings of blood and victory. The Council of War has spoken. Og will meet Israel in the open field, giant against man, ancient bloodline against divine promise. But as the torches flicker and the council disperses to prepare for battle, the King of Bashan walks alone to the window of his throne room. Far to the south, barely visible against the night sky, a pillar of fire rises above the Israelite camp, a column of flame that does not waver, that does not dim, that burns with a light no earthly fire could produce. Og stares at it for a long time, and somewhere beneath his iron confidence, in chambers of his heart he would never acknowledge, something cold begins to stir. The sun rises blood red over the plains of Edrei. Mist clings to the ground like the breath of the dead, swirling around the ankles of 600,000 Israelite warriors who stand in formation, their shields locked, their spears raised, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the army of Bashan assembles. They have marched through the night, driven by the command of their God. And now they wait in the cold morning air for the battle that will determine the fate of nations. Behind them, the pillar of cloud hovers low, pulsing with light that seems almost eager, almost hungry. Before them, the gates of Edrei swing open, and the giants come forth to war. The ground shakes with their footsteps. First come the soldiers of ordinary height, Amorites and Canaanites conscripted into Og's service, their faces pale with terror, driven forward by the whips of their giant masters. Behind them march the warriors of the Rephaim bloodline, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, clad in armor of iron scales, carrying spears the size of young trees, swords that would take 2 ordinary men to lift. Their formation is perfect, disciplined, the product of centuries of military tradition. And at the center of the host, towering above them all, rides Og himself. He stands in a chariot of black iron, drawn by 4 horses bred for size and fury, each beast nearly as terrifying as the king it serves. His armor gleams in the morning light, plates of iron fitted over a frame of giant bone, a helm crowned with the horns of some ancient creature, a shield broad enough to cover 3 ordinary men. In his right hand, he grips a spear of iron, its shaft as thick as a man's leg, its blade as long as a sword. His left hand holds the reins, guiding his chariot toward the front lines, where he intends to personally crush the prophet who dared to march against him. "There," Og bellows, his voice carrying across the battlefield like the roar of a wounded lion. "There stands their leader, the old man with the staff. Kill him, and their God abandons them. Kill him, and their courage dies. Forward!" The Bashanite army surges across the plain. The earth trembles. Dust rises in clouds so thick it nearly blots out the sun. The Israelite commanders shout orders, steadying their lines, reminding their soldiers of the promises they carry. But even the bravest among them feels his heart falter as the giants approach. These are not the enemies they faced at Jahaz. These are not mere men. These are the children of the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels, monsters from the age before the flood. How can flesh and blood stand against such things? Moses raises his staff. He is 120 years old, his beard white as snow, his body sustained by power that is not his own. He does not flinch as the giant army charges. He does not step back as Og's chariot thunders toward the Israelite lines. Instead, he lifts his voice, not to his soldiers, not to his commanders, but to the presence that hovers above them all, the God who has led them through the wilderness, who has fed them with bread from heaven, who has promised them this very victory. "Lord of hosts," Moses cries, his words cutting through the chaos of battle like a blade of pure light. "The enemy comes against your people. The giants rise against your inheritance. Show them this day that there is no God in heaven or earth who can stand against you. Show them the power of your arm. Show them that the blood of the Nephilim is nothing before the breath of the Almighty." What happens next will be told and retold for 3,000 years. The pillar of cloud descends, not slowly, not gently, but with the speed and fury of a striking serpent. It crashes into the Bashanite lines like a wall of living thunder, scattering chariots, throwing giants from their feet, turning the orderly advance into instant chaos. Horses scream and break free from their harnesses. Soldiers who moments ago were charging with confidence now flee in mindless terror, trampling their own comrades in their desperation to escape. The Israelite army surges forward into the breach, and the slaughter begins. Og's chariot is thrown sideways by the impact. One wheel shattered, his horses dead in their traces. The giant king rises from the wreckage, unhurt, his iron armor dented but intact. Around him, his army is dying. The warriors he has trained for centuries are being cut down by men a third their size, their legendary strength useless against the terror that grips their hearts. Og watches in disbelief as the Rephaim fall. As the bloodline of the Watchers is extinguished one sword stroke at a time, this cannot be happening. This cannot be real. He is Og. He has never known defeat. Blood soaks into the volcanic soil of Edrei, turning the black earth into crimson mud. Bodies lie scattered across the plain. Giants and men intertwined in the democracy of death, their weapons still clutched in lifeless hands, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and rage. The battle has become a rout. The legendary army of Bashan, undefeated for 5 centuries, breaks apart like a ship dashed against rocks. Warriors who once inspired nightmares now flee screaming into the hills, pursued by Israelite soldiers who show no mercy, who have been commanded to leave none alive. Og stands alone in the center of the carnage. His chariot lies shattered behind him. His bodyguards are dead, their massive forms crumpled on the ground like fallen towers. Around him, a circle of Israelite warriors has formed, hundreds of them, their spears leveled, their eyes fixed on the giant king who refuses to fall. They do not attack. They wait. Something is happening here that transcends ordinary warfare. Something that must be witnessed. Something that will be remembered until the end of time. Come then! Og roars, his voice shaking with fury that borders on madness. He raises his iron spear, still stained with the blood of the Israelites he has killed. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, their bodies marking his path across the battlefield. Come and face me, not your invisible God hiding in clouds, but you, men of flesh and blood. Which of you will stand against Og? Which of you will die on my spear? The Israelite circle parts. Through the gap walks an old man, his white beard flowing in the wind, his simple robes untouched by the blood and dust that covers everything else. Moses moves slowly, deliberately, his staff tapping against the ground with each step. He shows no fear. He shows no hesitation. He walks toward the 13-foot giant as if approaching a wayward child who must be disciplined. Og laughs, a terrible sound, hollow and broken. You? The prophet sends an ancient shepherd to face me? Where is your army now, old man? Where is your mighty God? I see only clouds and smoke. I see only tricks and illusions. But I am real. I am flesh and iron and fury. And when I have torn you apart, I will mount your head on the gates of Edrei, as a warning to all who serve your pathetic deity. Moses stops 10 paces from the giant. He plants his staff in the ground before him. When he speaks, his voice is quiet, almost gentle. Yet somehow it carries across the entire battlefield, reaching the ears of every soldier, every survivor, every witness to what is about to unfold. You speak of flesh, Moses replies. You boast of iron and fury. But you stand in the presence of the one who created flesh from dust, who breathed life into the first man, who holds every star in the heavens in the palm of his hand. Your fathers, the Watchers, abandoned their place in his courts. Your ancestors, the Nephilim, corrupted his creation. For this, he sent the flood. For this, he decreed the destruction of your bloodline. And today, Og, today that decree is fulfilled, not by my hand, not by the hand of Israel, but by the hand of the Almighty himself. something changes in the air. The pillar of cloud, which has hovered over the battlefield like a patient predator, begins to descend once more. Og feels it before he sees it, a weight pressing down upon him, a presence so vast that his giant frame suddenly feels small, insignificant, like an ant standing before a mountain. His iron armor grows cold. His muscles, which have never failed him, begin to tremble. The spear slips from fingers that no longer obey his commands. And for the first time in 500 years, Og understands what his enemies have always felt in his presence: terror. Absolute, overwhelming, inescapable terror. He tries to run. The last of the Rephaim, the king who swore he would never bow, turns his back and tries to flee like the lowest of his soldiers. But his legs will not carry him. He falls to his knees in the bloody mud of Edrei, his great body collapsing under a weight that no physical force could create. Above him, the cloud swirls with light that burns his eyes even when they are closed. Around him, the Israelite soldiers watch in silent awe as their God does what no army could accomplish alone. Moses raises his staff one final time. Let it be done according to your word. The iron spear of an Israelite captain, a man whose name history will not record, finds the gap in Og's armor, the space between helm and breastplate, where even giant smiths could not provide perfect protection. The blade sinks deep. The King of Bashan, last of the Rephaim, heir to the blood of the Watchers, falls forward into the mud of his own kingdom. His eyes remain open, staring at nothing, reflecting the light of the cloud that still burns above him. The giants are no more. The bloodline ends, and across the battlefield, 600,000 voices rise in a cry of victory that echoes from the mountains of Bashan to the throne of heaven itself. Silence hangs over the plain of Edrei like a funeral shroud. The body of Og lies where it fell, massive and broken, already beginning to sink into the blood-soaked mud that surrounds it. Flies gather in black clouds. Crows circle overhead, crying their harsh songs of death. The greatest giant of the age, the last pure blood of the Rephaim, the king who believed himself immortal, has become nothing more than meat for scavengers. Around him, the corpses of his army stretch to the horizon, a carpet of flesh and iron that will take days to bury, months to forget, millennia to fully comprehend. Moses kneels beside the fallen giant, not in mourning, but in confirmation. He has seen many things in his 120 years: the courts of Pharaoh, the burning bush, the parted sea, the glory of God on Sinai. But this moment carries its own weight. The Rephaim were ancient when Abraham walked the earth. They were legends when Jacob fled to Egypt. They were nightmares whispered around Israelite campfires for 400 years of slavery. And now, the last of them lies dead at the feet of a shepherd who learned to speak with God. It is not finished, the Lord speaks, his voice rising from the cloud that still hovers over the battlefield. 60 cities remain. 60 fortresses of darkness still stand. The people who dwell within them served the giants, worshipped their gods, participated in their abominations. You shall drive them out. You shall tear down their altars. You shall burn their groves and break their pillars. Not one stone shall remain upon another. Not one soul shall escape the judgment that has been decreed. The conquest of Bashan begins before the sun sets on the day of Og's death. The Israelite army divides into 12 columns, one for each tribe, each column assigned a portion of the giant kingdom to subdue. They march through landscapes that seem designed to inspire despair, Black volcanic plains where nothing grows, twisted forests where the oaks have grown for centuries without human touch. Mountain passes so narrow that a handful of defenders should be able to hold them forever. But no defense holds. No fortress stands. The terror of what happened at Edrei has spread faster than the army itself. Ashtaroth falls first, the great temple city, center of worship for gods whose names are too dark to speak aloud. The Israelites find the gates already open when they arrive. The priests have fled into the hills. The soldiers have thrown down their weapons. The common people kneel in the streets, begging for mercy that will not come. The command is absolute. The judgment is complete. By nightfall, Ashtaroth burns, its temples collapsing into rubble, its altars shattered, its sacred groves reduced to ash that the wind carries across the mountains. Why must they all die? A young Israelite soldier asks his commander as they watch the flames consume another city. He is not questioning the order. He would never dare. But something in his eyes reveals the weight of what they are doing. These are not warriors they are killing now. These are families, children, old women who cannot run. The commander, a veteran of 40 years in the wilderness, places a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Do you remember the stories of the flood?" he asks quietly. "Do you remember why God drowned the world? Because the corruption of the Nephilim had spread so deeply into humanity that there was no saving it. The violence of the giants infected everything they touched, their worship, their customs, their very blood. God spared Noah to begin again, and now he commands us to cut out this corruption before it spreads further. It is not cruelty, my son. It is surgery, terrible, necessary surgery to save what remains. City after city falls. Saleka in the far north, perched on a volcanic cone like a black crown. Golan in the western highlands, its walls breached in a single day. Karnaim, Be'eshtera, Raphan, names that will be recorded in scrolls and carved into stone, then slowly forgotten as centuries pass. The giant architecture is too massive to destroy completely, so the Israelites simply abandon it, leaving the great basalt blocks to stand as silent witnesses to what once was. Archaeologists, thousands of years later, will discover these ruins and marvel at their construction. They will wonder how ancient peoples could have built such things. They will not guess the truth. The final count is recorded by scribes who travel with the army. 60 cities with walls and gates, plus countless unwalled villages scattered throughout the countryside. All of them conquered. All of them cleansed. The kingdom that Og built, over 500 years of blood and iron, ceases to exist in less than 3 months. The promised land east of the Jordan now belongs to Israel, specifically to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, who will make their homes in the Black Mountains where giants once walked. But one artifact remains, one trophy that will be preserved as a witness to future generations. The iron bed of Og, 9 cubits by 4 cubits, is carried from the ruins of his palace and placed on display in the Ammonite city of Rabbah. There it will stand for centuries, a monument to the giant who fell and to the God who brought him down. The bed stands alone in the great hall of Rabbah, illuminated by torchlight that flickers against its black surface. 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, 13 feet by 6 feet in the measurements of later ages. Large enough for 3 ordinary men to sleep upon with room to spare. It is forged of iron so pure that even after centuries it shows no rust, no decay, no sign of the years that have passed since its owner drew his final breath in the mud of Edrei. Visitors come from across the ancient world to see it, kings and merchants, scholars and soldiers, pilgrims seeking proof that the old stories are true, and every one of them stands in silence before this monument of black metal, trying to imagine the creature who once lay upon it. The Ammonites have made it the centerpiece of their capital. They did not fight against Israel during the conquest of Bashan, wise enough to recognize that opposing the God who drowned the world and crushed the giants would mean their own annihilation. Instead, they offered tribute, opened their markets to Israelite trade, and requested only one thing in return: the bed of Og as a trophy, a symbol, a reminder to all nations that even the mightiest can fall. Moses agreed. The bed was too heavy to carry across the Jordan anyway, and leaving it in Rabbah served the purposes of the Almighty. Let the nations see. Let them remember. Let them understand. My grandfather saw him once, an old Ammonite guide tells visitors who pay for the privilege of standing before the bed. His voice echoes through the stone chamber, mixing with the whispered prayers of those who have come seeking something they cannot name. He was a trader who brought goods to Edrei, back when the giants still ruled. He said Og was the most terrifying thing he ever witnessed. Not just his size, though that alone would stop a man's heart, but his eyes. They burned with something ancient, something that remembered the world before the flood. My grandfather never slept well after that journey. He dreamed of those eyes until the day he died. The bed itself tells a story to those who know how to read it. The iron is not merely forged. It is alloyed with metals that ancient smiths should not have known how to combine. The craftsmanship suggests techniques that would not appear again for centuries, knowledge passed down from the Watchers to their giant offspring, secrets of metallurgy that died with the Rephaim at Edrei. Along the edges, barely visible in the torchlight, run inscriptions in a language that no living scholar can decipher. Some say they are blessings from the gods Og worshipped. Others claim they are curses, dark words meant to protect the king as he slept. The truth, like so much about the giants, has been lost to time. Generations pass. The bed remains. The Israelites establish their kingdom west of the Jordan, and then divide into two kingdoms, and then fall to Assyria and Babylon. The Ammonites rise and decline. New empires sweep across the land: Persian, Greek, Roman, each one bringing new visitors to stand before the Iron Monument in Rabbah. The city itself changes names, becoming Philadelphia under the Greeks, part of the Decapolis under Rome. But the bed endures. Travelers write about it in letters home. Historians mention it in their chronicles. The giant king has been dead for 1,000 years, then 2,000. Yet his bed continues to testify to his existence. How do we know any of this is real? A Greek philosopher asks his Roman companion as they examine the bed during the reign of Augustus. Perhaps it was merely a large man, and legend has exaggerated his size. Perhaps this bed was a ceremonial object, never meant for actual sleeping. The stories of giants and angels mating with women, surely these are myths, fantasies invented by primitive minds to explain what they could not understand. The Roman shrugs, running his hand along the cold iron surface. Perhaps. But consider this: the bed exists. It is not a story, not a legend, but solid metal that we can touch and measure. Someone made it. Someone slept upon it. And if the bed is real, if this single artifact survives to testify across the centuries, then perhaps we should be slower to dismiss the stories that surround it. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that our ancestors were not liars or fools. Perhaps the world was once stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. The centuries continue their march. The bed disappears from recorded history sometime after the Roman period. Destroyed, buried, stolen, or simply forgotten as empires crumble, and new civilizations rise upon their ruins. Archaeologists in later ages will search for it without success. Scholars will debate whether it ever existed at all. But the testimony remains, written in the oldest books of the Israelites, preserved across 3,000 years of copying and translation. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it. The giant is gone, his kingdom is dust, but the memory of his iron throne endures, waiting to be rediscovered by those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. The dust of ages settles over the ruins of Bashan. Where 60 cities once stood, now only scattered stones remain. Black basalt blocks too massive to move, too ancient to explain. Silent witnesses to a kingdom that vanished in the span of a single summer. Shepherds graze their flocks among the fallen walls. Farmers plow fields that were once paved with the blood of sacrifices. Children play in the shadows of doorways built for creatures 3 times their height, never knowing whose feet once crossed those thresholds. The giants are gone, but their lesson remains, carved into the bedrock of history, waiting for those with wisdom to understand. What was Og truly? A monster? A king? A genetic aberration descended from the union of heaven and earth? The ancient texts speak of him as all these things and more. He was the last of a bloodline that should never have existed, the final ember of a fire that God himself sought to extinguish in the waters of the flood. He built an empire through strength and terror. He forged a throne of iron to declare his permanence. He looked upon the armies of Israel and saw only insects to be crushed. And in a single day, everything he built, everything he believed, everything he was, all of it fell before the breath of the Almighty. There is a pattern here that repeats throughout the ages. Pharaoh believed himself divine, and his army drowned in the sea. Sennacherib brought 185,000 soldiers against Jerusalem, and they died in a single night. Nebuchadnezzar declared himself the builder of mighty Babylon, and he spent 7 years eating grass like an animal. Herod Agrippa accepted worship as a god, and he was consumed by worms before sunset. The pattern is always the same. Human power rises, declares itself absolute, challenges the throne of heaven, and falls. Every time, without exception. Why do the nations rage? The psalmist would later write, centuries after Og's bones had crumbled to dust. Why do the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us break their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. These words could have been written about Og. They could be written about every tyrant who has ever lived. They will be written about tyrants yet to come. But the story of Og is not merely a warning to the proud. It is also a promise to the faithful. Consider what Israel faced when they marched against Bashan. They were a nation of former slaves, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, armed with bronze weapons against enemies who wielded iron. They confronted a king who had never been defeated, who ruled 60 fortified cities, who commanded an army of giants bred for war across centuries. By every natural calculation, they should have been annihilated. Their bones should have joined the bones of every other nation foolish enough to challenge the Rephaim. But they carried something that Og, for all his strength, did not possess: a promise from the God who cannot lie. "Do not fear him," the Lord told Moses before the battle. Not, "Do not respect his power." Not, "Do not acknowledge his strength." But, "Do not fear him." Because fear is the weapon of tyrants. Fear is the currency of the Ogs of every generation. They build walls of stone to inspire fear. They forge beds of iron to proclaim their permanence. They project an image of invincibility so that their enemies will defeat themselves before the battle even begins. But faith, genuine faith, rooted in the promises of God, breaks the spell of fear. Faith allowed David to face Goliath. Faith allowed 3 young Hebrews to enter a furnace of fire. Faith allowed a carpenter's son to walk calmly toward a Roman cross. And faith allowed 600,000 former slaves to march against the giants of Bashan and triumph. The screen fades slowly to black, but the images linger. A giant king on his iron throne, surveying a kingdom he believed would last forever. A pillar of cloud descending upon a battlefield with the fury of divine judgment. A bed of black metal standing alone in an empty hall. Testament to a power that proved not powerful enough. These images are not merely history. They are prophecy. They are warning. They are invitation. For in every age, new giants arise. New tyrants build their thrones. New kingdoms declare themselves eternal. And in every age, the same question echoes across the centuries. In whom will you place your trust? In the iron beds of earthly power, which rust and crumble and are forgotten? Or in the promises of the one who measured the heavens with the span of his hand, who weighed the mountains in scales, who calls the stars by name and commands the sea to be still? Og made his choice. He chose iron. He chose himself. He chose defiance against the throne of heaven, and he fell. The choice now passes to you. Choose wisely. Choose humbly. Choose before the cloud descends. For the God who brought down the giants of Bashan is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And his arm has not grown short.